It's true crime time here at the Constant Reader channel. Today I'm breaking down my top 5 true crime books of all time so far. And stick around at the end because I have a tiny little story to tell you about my own brush with a true crime story. My name is Nikki the Librarian and welcome to the Constant Reader channel. My first book is called Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. This tells the parallel story between two individuals. Daniel Burham, who is the architect of the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. He designs the buildings, the layouts, the parking lots, the bathrooms. He does it all. And then it's also the story of H.H. Holmes, a serial killer on the level of Jack the Ripper that you may or may not have heard of, who also designed an elaborate building, although his was actually called the Murder Castle after all of his terrible things came to light. But what's interesting is this story goes back and forth between these two men who they both had the same goal, to bring a huge influx of people to Chicago. Now, the Daniel Burham person wanted Chicago to be like this amazing cultural and beautiful city because Chicago kind of got a bad rap that it was in the Midwest and it's kind of gross and it's not as cultured and refined as those out east. And he wanted to change that with the World's Fair. And so his layout, and you can look online, or if you go to the Field Museum in Chicago, that's also one of the original buildings. They were beautiful. It was spectacular. The World's Fair in 1893 was just, everybody was talking about it all over the entire world. And remember, this is before there's internet or even a transatlantic cable, I think. So there's Daniel. He's doing his thing. But then there's H.H. Holmes. He's also trying to attract people to stay at his hotel. Unchaperoned women, really, is what he was catering toward. And the rooms there and the architecture, he always had different crews working on different things, so nobody could see the overall plan of this terrible building. You had places, the rooms would lock on the inside, or hallways would end and there was nowhere else to go. The basement was just bad things happened in the basement. The main takeaway is we will never know exactly how many people met their fate at Holmes's hotel. My second crime book is The Godmother, Murder, Vengeance, and the Bloody Struggle of Mafia Women by Barbie, Latza, Nadeau. This book takes all of your preconceived notions about the Godfather and the Mafia because you've been watching the movies or you've been watching the TV shows. No. Mafia women are just as ruthless and deadly as everyone else in the Mafia. And the author was able to interview Pupita Manesca, who was a godmother of a Mafia crime ring in Sicily. Now, she rose to prominence when she murdered her husband's murderer by shooting him 29 times to kill him. What I liked about this book is it takes a subject that I thought I knew enough about, and no, it just shows you that the Mafia is run by whoever's smart enough, crafty enough, and ruthless enough for the top position. My next book is I'll Be Gone in the Dark by McNamara. Now, a disclaimer about this book, she died before the book could actually be finished up. So the first part is very well the style of what you would think of as a book. And the second part is like her remaining notes and her impressions and interviews, things like that. And what I like about this book is, number one, it was instrumental in catching the Golden State Killer. You know, people can say, oh, no, we would have caught the Golden State Killer otherwise. No, I disagree. Michelle's work was instrumental in catching that man who eluded the police for decades. So that's number one. I read it because of that. And number two, I was so fascinated to find out what an author had to do in order to be able to circumvent what the police would just be able to do. They can, check vehicle registrations. They can interview people, things that she just didn't have access to. So I highly recommend I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. My fourth book, we're going back in time to 1865. April 1865, because it is Manhunt, the 12-day chase for Abraham Lincoln's killer. This true crime nonfiction book follows the chaotic, unstable, unbelievable 12 days between Lincoln's assassination and when they finally caught James Wilkes Booth. You might think you know the Lincoln assassination. I thought I did. No, I didn't. Did you know it was a 4-man conspiracy to not only assassinate Lincoln, but also Vice President Johnson, as well as Secretary of War James Sewell, I think that's his name. It's right after the Civil War is over, and the North and the South are still trying to figure out, how do we get past these last 4 years when we were trying to murder each other? So in all of that chaos, there's this other chaos that happens when the most celebrated actor, stage actor of his day, he's like the Brad Pitt of his day, murders the president and then runs. I know how it's going to end. Everybody has to learn this in American history class. Yet I didn't know. I got to tell you, the writing style of James Swanson is so amazing that I was edging my seat. And I knew that they were going to catch John Wilkes Booth. Didn't matter. My brain said, oh, what next? What next? And I loved it. For my last book, we are going further south to Savannah, Georgia, because it is Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil by John Berendt. Now, disclaimer, this book is not just true crime. It's also travel writing. And you're going to want to go to Savannah when you read this book, because you're going to see the squares and you're going to want to go to the cemetery. And I'm going to say, Savannah knows this, and Savannah has said, okay, we have all of these booky, nerdy people here looking at all the sites. And they did that because the author paints such a interesting portrait of this city. It's these historic landscapes, it's the squares, and most importantly, it's the people that make up this town. It was moody, it was atmospheric, and it kind of puts a spell on you. It's not often that I have books that I react to in this way, but this nonfiction book did. And there it is. These are my top 5 true crime nonfiction books that I have ever read so far. Are there any true crime books that you would recommend to me? Put it down in the comments below. Also hit the like and subscribe buttons if you haven't done so already. If you liked any of the titles that I mentioned today and would like to read your own copy, please get one at your local independent bookstore or your public library. Thanks, and I'll see you again next time. Bye. Okay, now that's done. The book thing, I got to tell you about how I have a brush with true crime. I'm working my day job. I'm a library director. I'm looking through an old book that was given to us by a club that is now defunct because, once again, it was a Civil War club. And in the club notes, there was a little newspaper cutout of this woman who died in 1929. But she died really young, even for 1929. She was like 47. And I thought, well, that's odd. I wonder why they cut that out and put that in there. I went to newspapers.com. This local woman from my town, her husband was on trial for her murder. I had never heard it. I have lived in this town since 2006. I had never heard anybody say anything about this. I went down a rabbit hole and I found out things that were even stranger and more crazy, and I couldn't wrap my head around it. It was so insane that my staff and I, we had to make a video about it because of all of the research that I did on this case. And they were just as intrigued and hot on the trail as I was. I am going to link that video in the description below. Things like this apparently happen all the time. And that's sad, but